it's a common requirement to have to create natural effects such as rain, snow, fire and so on. Fire probably is the most difficult effect to reproduce. We've had a look at snow earlier on in this DVD, and in this chapter we're having a look at rain. Now there are a number of things to take into account with rain. Probably it's a little bit more complex than snow, because rain obviously is fluid runs down surfaces, fluid splashes, which is something that snow doesn't do. Snow generally settles on a surface and melts, and that's about as complex as it gets. Obviously with water you've got the possibility of it running down surfaces, and that becomes more complex in itself as well, because obviously you can have complex surfaces. Like in this scene we've got this statue of the ogre, and you can see the water's running down it and the rain's coming down from above. And then the other thing that we've got in this scene is we've got these splashes of water on the ground as well. So this is something which is obviously something that we wanted to represent. There's two ways of looking at splashes, I suppose. You could either say that they're completely made up of particles, and the problem with using that system is that you'd need an awful lot of particles to represent those splashes. And the other thing is as well is that if you look at splashes in slow motion, very often they're kind of coherent. They'll form a sort of crown shape where it's actually a body of water. It's not actually particulate, it's just like a body of water in a sort of crown shape with droplets at the edges of it. And for that I decided that it was probably better to try and use geometry to kind of approximate that kind of effect. Whether it's successful or not is up to you, and it's not really necessarily a finished effect. Obviously you can take this further, and if you wanted to do a similar effect to this in your own kind of productions or your own circumstances, then obviously you can produce a much more sort of finished, much more random, much more polished kind of water effect. So let's have a look at what we actually have in our scene here. Let's look around the objects that we have first. If I turn on display of all and just have geometry for a start, we've got a ground object, and that's purely just for rendering. We have a pedestal object here, which is just a chamfer cylinder. And, you know, this model isn't very complex. There's nothing really great about it. We've got this ogre model here, which was modeled obviously by Paul Neal for our rigging DVDs, which are great. Definitely have a look at those if you're interested in rigging. But you can actually see I've got it posed here, and I've got a mesh smooth on it, which is set to only kick in at render time. And that just gives us our nice smoothly surfaced ogre that we see in our render. But if I go here and turn off box mode, you'll see that I also have another copy of the ogre in exactly the same spot. And that's actually used as our collision geometry. And the reason for that is that basically the U-deflectors, although obviously they can use any geometry, the more complex the geometry is, the slower they are to solve. So often it's a good idea, for instance, to use this in a sub-D environment, to use the original sub-D mesh as the collision object. In this case it's actually quite chunky, but because the water's splashing around and running over the surface quite quickly, in the end we got away with it, I think. It works quite well. If we actually have a look at the properties on this collision object, you can see I've got it actually set up so it's not renderable. So it's purely there in the scene just as an object on which our particles can collide and then run down. And at render time we're just using this version of the mesh for rendering on. And as I said, that gets mesh smoothed. So that's our basic geometry that we see. If I zoom in here, this is our rain droplet. And as I mentioned in one of the other chapters, let's actually just call it rain droplet. There we go. As I mentioned in one of the other chapters, actually I think this is our rain droplet here. Yeah, there it is, mesh raindrop. As I mentioned in another chapter, I originally had it on, I think it was this many levels of subdivision, and in the end it just didn't really need that. You know, you couldn't really see that kind of detail, so 3 was fine, 2 would have been fine actually, I think, maybe even 1, but in the end I went for 3, and that gave us a reasonably fast render. But like I said, considering the size, you can probably get away with 2 subdivisions on it really. That's used as an instance mesh within our flow. And then over here you can see we've got these 3 objects. They're actually in a group at the moment, so if I open up our particle flow and just turn off the flow for now, I'll just open up this group so we can grab these individually.